Silence swallowed the November night like the lid of a coffin being sealed. The rain fell sideways through Chicago's empty streets, each drop hitting the pavement with the sound of breaking glass. And there, 3 blocks from the upscale Italian restaurant where candlelight flickered against mahogany wood, Dominic Rossi lay bleeding on cold concrete. His silk shirt, the kind that cost more than Elena Harper made in a month, was now soaked crimson. His breathing came in shallow gasps. His vision blurred at the edges, the streetlights above him spinning into unfocused halos. The gunshot wound to his abdomen throbbed with a pain so consuming that thought itself became impossible. His phone lay shattered 15 feet away, its screen dark. His gun had skittered into a storm drain 2 minutes before, unreachable, useless. For the first time in 23 years, Dominic Rossi was completely powerless. Footsteps approached from the south. Not the footsteps of his men. Not the heavy, measured steps of someone coming to help. These were different. Lighter. Uncertain. A woman's footsteps, moving through the rain with the exhaustion of someone who had been awake far too long. Elena Harper did not see him at first. She was counting the items in her grocery bag as she walked, her lips moving silently. Eggs, 2 loaves of bread, a package of chicken thighs marked down 40%. $17.43 remaining in her pocket. $17.43 to last until Friday, when she would receive her paycheck from the diner. It would have to be enough. It always had to be enough because there was no other option. There never was. She was 5 steps away when her shoe caught on something. Her bag tumbled. Apples rolled across the wet pavement and disappeared into the darkness. And when she looked down to see what had tripped her, she found the bleeding body of a man she did not recognize. Elena froze. Every instinct screamed at her to run. This was Chicago. This was danger wearing a silk shirt. This was a situation that could destroy everything she had fought to protect. Her children. Her apartment. Her job. The precarious balance that kept them alive. Getting involved with a bleeding man in the middle of the night at 3 in the morning was the kind of choice that unraveled lives. But Dominic's eyes opened. Even through the haze of pain and blood loss, even as consciousness threatened to slip away like water through her fingers, his dark eyes found hers. And in that moment, something in Elena Harper's chest cracked open. She did not think about the consequences. She did not calculate the risk. She simply dropped to her knees in the November rain, her nurse's instinct overriding her survival instinct, and pressed her palms against the wound. Blood was warm. That was the first thing she noticed. She had always thought blood would feel cold, but it was warm like life itself pouring out onto her hands. Her scarf, the only warm thing she owned, the one she had bought 3 years ago from a thrift store for $2, came off her neck in one motion. She wrapped it around his torso, her hands shaking, her breath coming in fast gasps. Her uniform was getting soaked. Her shoes were disappearing into puddles. None of it mattered. "Stay with me," she said to the stranger. Her voice trembled like a candle in the wind. "You stay with me, do you understand? Do not close your eyes." Dominic's hand, weak as it was, reached up and gripped her wrist. Not threatening. Just gripping. Just holding onto something real. Something warm. Something that had not abandoned him in the rain. He did not know her name. She did not know his. But in that moment, on the rain-soaked pavement of Chicago at 3:07 in the morning, the most powerful man in the city and the most invisible woman in the city became bound together by the simple fact that one of them refused to let the other die alone. The sound of an engine echoed 3 blocks away. A black SUV turning onto a side street. Moving slowly. Searching. If you are still with us, drop a like on this video right now. Share it with someone you trust and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. This story is far from over. Before we continue with what happened when those black SUVs arrived, let us go back to the very beginning. Let us go back to the morning that started everything, 12 hours earlier, when Elena Harper was still invisible and Dominic Rossi was still untouchable. The morning arrived grey and cold. Elena's alarm went off at 5:33 a.m., and she did not snooze it. She never snoozed it. The moment the sound penetrated her exhaustion, she forced her legs over the side of her mattress and stood up. The apartment was so cold she could see her breath. The heating bill was 3 weeks overdue. She had called the landlord twice. He had not returned her calls. Her children slept in the room next door. Through the thin walls, she could hear Emma's soft breathing, the slight rattling sound that meant her daughter was fighting another cold. Michael slept silently, as he always did, conserving energy the way only a child raised in scarcity learns to do. They were 7 and 5. They should have been sleeping in warm beds with heat flowing through the walls. They should have been worrying about spelling tests and playground friendships. Instead, they were learning to live small, to take up less space, to ask for less. Elena wrapped herself in the moth-eaten cardigan that had belonged to her mother and moved to the kitchenette. The envelope was still on the table where she had left it the night before. White and official looking. The words printed in bold black ink, "Final Notice." Her hands trembled as she held it. $7,318 remaining on the medical debt her late husband had left her. $7,000 that she would be paying on for the rest of her life. $7,000 that meant every month, every single month, a piece of her check went to a company that sent her letters addressed to someone who was already dead. She had learned not to cry about it anymore. Tears were a luxury. Tears required energy she could not spare. Instead, she filled the electric kettle with water and plugged it in. The cord was frayed near the base. She had wrapped it with electrical tape 2 months ago and it had held so far. Around her, the apartment seemed to press in. The walls were thin enough that she could hear her neighbor's television through them. The window looked out onto an alley where dumpsters overflowed. The ceiling had a water stain shaped like a hand reaching down. This was her kingdom. This was everything she had managed to build after Michael died, after the funeral bills had come, after the medical debt had swallowed her savings, after she had lost the house and the car and the future she had thought was waiting for her. Emma appeared in the doorway at 6:15 a.m., still half asleep, her hair tangled, her eyes red from congestion. She was wearing the same clothes she had worn the day before. 3 outfits for school, all of them acquired from a donation center where Elena volunteered on her 1 day off each month. "Mama, I cannot breathe through my nose," Emma said, her voice small and nasally and so defeated that Elena's heart split into smaller pieces. Elena knelt down and felt her daughter's forehead. Warm. Not fever warm. Just the kind of warm that came from sleeping under thin blankets in a cold room. She pressed a kiss to the top of Emma's head and whispered, "We will get you some medicine today. I promise." She did not know if she could keep that promise. The over-the-counter cold medicine cost $7. She did not have $7 to spare. But she would figure it out because that was what mothers did. They figured it out. They made promises and they found ways to keep them even when the math did not work. Especially when the math did not work. The kettle whistled. She made 2 cups of weak tea with the same tea bag she had used the morning before, stretching it as far as it would go. She made toast with the last of the bread, spreading it with margarine instead of butter because margarine was cheaper. She had learned to make terrible food taste okay through sheer force of will and repetition. At 7 o'clock, she woke Michael. He dressed himself without being asked, pulling on his uniform for school, his small fingers struggling with the buttons. He was a quiet child, the kind of child who observed more than he spoke. Elena wondered sometimes what he was thinking about. She wondered if he blamed her for the circumstances of his life, the way she blamed herself. The walk to school took 20 minutes. She held Emma's hand and Michael followed slightly behind them, his backpack hanging off one shoulder. The neighborhood around them was the color of old concrete. Storefronts with metal gates. Sidewalks with cracks that had become small canyons. A few people moved through the streets but no one seemed to see them. Invisibility was something Elena had learned to inhabit like a second skin. Years of being a widow in a city that did not make room for widows. Years of working jobs that did not require names, only hands. years of becoming so small that she could fit through the gaps everyone else left behind. The school was a brick building, for stories, with a playground where the equipment was held together with prayer and rust. Elena kissed both her children goodbye. Michael accepted it with patience. Emma clung to her for an extra moment, not wanting to let go. "I love you so much," Elena said into her daughter's tangled hair. "You are so brave. You are so strong. Will you pick me up?" Emma asked, fear flickering across her small face. "I will always pick you up," Elena promised. She meant it with everything in her body. She would always come back. She would always be there. Even if it killed her, even if it meant working until her hands bled, even if it meant never sleeping again, she would keep showing up for her children. That was the only sacred thing she had left. The diner where she worked as a waitress was called Mel's. It was the kind of place where the coffee was always hot, the eggs were never quite cooked right, and the customers left tips that averaged $2 per table. She had worked there for 4 years. The manager knew her name. The regulars knew her face. But none of them really saw her. She was the woman who brought food. She was the woman who smiled and refilled cups and cleared plates. She was not a person with a name and a story. She was a function. At 10:11 a.m., as Elena was carrying a tray of eggs and hash browns to table 4, her phone vibrated in her pocket. She ignored it. Then it vibrated again. And again. 3 calls in succession. Her stomach dropped. 3 calls meant something was wrong. 3 calls meant the school was calling. She set down the tray and excused herself, moving quickly to the back of the diner where the phone reception was better. She called back with her heart hammering against her ribs. Emma had collapsed in her classroom. Emma had been having trouble breathing. Emma had been taken to Children's Hospital by ambulance. They were running tests. They wanted Elena to come now. The room tilted. Elena gripped the wall to steady herself. She did not remember telling her manager she was leaving. She did not remember clocking out or hanging up her apron. She only remembered running. The radiator in Elena Harper's apartment had stopped working somewhere around midnight. She knew this because she sat on the edge of her bed at 4:24 a.m., listening to the silence, feeling the cold creep through the walls like something alive and hungry. The apartment was a 2-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a building that had been old when her grandmother was young. Water stains bloomed across the ceiling like flowers no one had planted. The kitchen faucet dripped. The bathroom tiles were cracked in patterns that almost looked like a map of somewhere beautiful, somewhere far away. She did not let herself think about that. Instead, Elena pulled on the cardigan she had worn for 6 years, the one with the button missing from the right side, and she moved quietly down the hallway. Emma and Lucas were still asleep, their bedroom door cracked just enough that she could hear them breathing. Emma, age 9, slept with her mouth open, one arm flung across her pillow like she had been reaching for something in a dream. Lucas, age 7, had kicked off his blanket again. Elena pulled it back up to his chin, careful not to wake him, her calloused fingers brushing his forehead. He was warm. Healthy. Alive. She would keep them alive. That was the only prayer she still believed in. The kitchen was small enough that she could stand in one corner and touch 3 walls if she stretched. The refrigerator hummed a sound like exhaustion. Inside, there was half a carton of eggs, a container of milk that would turn sour in 2 days, a stick of butter, bread. She had counted the money 3 times yesterday. $17. That was all. $17 to stretch across food and the bus fare and whatever emergency might arrive on a Thursday that required spending money she did not have. Elena cracked 1 egg into the pan. It sizzled. She watched the white cook while she toasted 2 pieces of bread. The butter she divided carefully. Half a slice of toast for her. 1 full slice for each child. The egg she split between 2 plates. It was not much. It was never much. By 6:15 a.m., Emma and Lucas shuffled into the kitchen with the slow movements of children who had learned not to expect fullness. They sat at the small table. Elena poured milk into 2 cups and set them down. "Mommy, there's only a tiny piece of egg," Emma said. She was not complaining. She was just stating a fact, the way children do when they have learned that speaking the truth about hunger is easier than pretending. Elena sat across from them with her black coffee, no cream, no sugar. She wrapped her hands around the cup and smiled. The smile came from somewhere deep, a place she kept locked away where hope still lived, even though hope was dangerous. "I already ate, sweetheart. This is all for you." She had not eaten. "Why do you look so tired, Mommy?" Lucas asked. His fork was too big for his small hand. "Because I had beautiful dreams about you," Elena said. "Dreams about you two growing up big and strong. Dreams about all the things you're going to do. And those dreams were so wonderful, they made me tired from smiling so much." Lucas nodded like this made perfect sense. Emma ate slowly, making the food last. She understood scarcity in the way that only children who have known it truly understand. The final notice letter sat on the kitchen counter. Elena kept her eyes away from it. She had opened it yesterday morning. $84,000. That was the number. $84,000 in medical debt from her husband's cancer treatment. David had died 3 years ago. The debt had lived longer than he had. The collectors called 6 times a day. Different voices, same threat. "Your account is in default. Your assets will be seized. Your wages will be garnished." As if she had assets. As if wages that averaged $2 per table in tips could be garnished into anything meaningful. Elena dressed the children. Emma's school uniform had a stain on the collar that would not come out. Lucas's shoes had a hole forming near the toe. She had taped it on the inside, a temporary fix that would probably last 1 more week. She braided Emma's hair and kissed the top of Lucas's head, and she walked them to the bus stop even though it meant arriving at the diner 8 minutes late. Her manager at Mel's, a man named Robert with a permanent scowl and a wedding ring he never mentioned, did not comment on the tardiness. He just nodded her toward the coffee station. The diner smelled like it always did. Grease. Coffee that had been brewing since 5 in the morning. The bleach they used on the floors. Behind the counter, the cook named Hal was flipping pancakes with the precision of someone who had done this exact motion 10,000 times. Elena tied her apron and pulled her order pad from her pocket. Table 4 wanted eggs over easy and wheat toast. Table 6 wanted pancakes and a side of bacon. Table 9 was the regulars, the ones who came every morning, who read the newspaper and drank coffee and left her $2.50 every single day without fail. They were not unkind. But they did not see her. She was the woman who brought food. She was a function, a service, a gap in their morning that needed filling. At 10:51 a.m., as Elena was carrying a tray of eggs and hash browns to table 4, her phone vibrated in her apron pocket. She did not stop walking. The eggs needed to stay warm. But the phone vibrated again. 3 times in succession. 3 calls meant something was wrong. Elena set down the tray with a smile she did not feel. She excused herself and moved to the back of the diner, to the storage room where the phone reception was strongest. Her heart was already hammering before she even pressed the button to call the school back. "Ms. Harper?" The voice was calm, which meant it was serious. When things were truly bad, people became very calm. "This is Principal Davis from Lincoln Elementary. Emma collapsed in her classroom about 15 minutes ago. She was having difficulty breathing. The school nurse called an ambulance and she's been transported to Children's Hospital. We tried to reach you immediately." The room tilted. "Which hospital?" Elena heard herself say. Her own voice sounded like it was coming from very far away. "Children's Hospital downtown. Emergency department. They're running some tests. They asked if you could come as soon as possible." She did not remember hanging up the phone. She did not remember telling Robert she was leaving or untying her apron or clocking out. She only remembered running. Running out of Mel's diner. Running toward the bus stop. Running because running made her feel like she was doing something, like her legs could carry her toward her daughter fast enough to change whatever was happening. But even as she ran, even as her worn shoes hit the November pavement, Elena did not know that in a hospital 17 blocks away, her daughter Emma was already in a room with monitors beeping and tubes and doctors speaking in voices that parents never want to hear. She did not know that the word she was about to hear, the diagnosis that was about to crack her world open, was something called congenital heart disease. She did not know that the number they would give her, $300,000, would be the final weight that broke her. And 3 blocks from where Elena ran, in a restaurant called Carmine's with candlelit booths and waiters who wore white gloves, Dominic Rossi sat in the back room with his lieutenants Carlo and Theo. He was a tall man, perhaps 42 years old, with dark hair that had begun to silver at the temples. His suit was tailored so precisely that every line seemed like it had been drawn by someone who understood power the way an artist understands color. A scar ran from his left eye to his cheekbone, thin and pale, a permanent reminder of a fight he had won 17 years ago. He wore a gold watch that cost more than some people earned in a year. When he moved, each movement was deliberate, controlled, the kind of stillness that comes from men who have learned that every gesture means something. Territory disputes, Carlo was saying. Carlo was 45, built like a wall, with the kind of loyalty that came from working for Dominic for 20 years. The Marchetti family is pushing again. Anthony keeps talking about how it should be his. Says he's tired of waiting. Anthony is a child, Dominic said. His voice was deep and solid, like an oath. He has been a child his whole life. He will die a child. But what Dominic did not know, what no one in that candlelit booth knew, was that outside the restaurant, in the November rain, a man named Anthony Marchetti was standing in the shadows with a gun in his hand and revenge in his heart. He had been waiting for an hour. His fingers were numb from cold. But he did not care about cold. He only cared about power. He only cared about taking what he believed belonged to him. The rain fell harder. Somewhere in the city, Elena was running toward her daughter. Somewhere else, in a private booth surrounded by the smells of expensive wine and garlic, Dominic Rossi was about to have his entire life change. And outside, in the darkness, Anthony Marchetti raised his gun and made a choice that would echo through all of their lives like thunder. The November rain hammered the pavement outside Carmine's restaurant like bullets striking steel. Inside the back booth, Dominic Rossi sat motionless, his dark eyes fixed on the wine glass before him, listening to Carlo speak about territory disputes and a nephew who believed the empire should belong to him. The candlelight caught the scar running from Dominic's left eye to his cheekbone, a thin, pale reminder of a victory won long ago. His gold watch reflected the flame as he lifted his glass, each movement deliberate, controlled, the way a man moves when he has learned that every gesture carries weight. Anthony keeps talking about succession, Carlo said. His voice was gravelly, worn from 20 years of loyalty. Says he's tired of waiting. Says the business should flow to blood relatives, not outsiders. Dominic's expression did not change. Anthony is a child. He will die a child. Outside, 30 feet from the restaurant's back exit, Anthony Marchetti stood in the shadows with a gun trembling in his hands. Rain soaked through his designer jacket. His fingers had gone numb an hour ago, but he did not feel the cold. He only felt the burning certainty that his uncle had stolen what belonged to him, and tonight, that would change. The back door opened. Dominic emerged first, Carlo and Theo flanking him at a distance, clearing the alley toward the black SUV waiting at the corner. The rain fell in sheets now, mixing with the neon glow from the liquor store across the street, painting everything in sickly pink and blue. Dominic's phone rang. He stopped walking. Reached into his coat pocket. 1 second. Just 1 second of distraction. Anthony stepped from the shadows. You never saw me coming, Uncle. You never believed I could lead. The gun went up. Anthony's hand shook so badly he almost dropped it. But his finger found the trigger. And pulled. The gunshot cracked through the rain like lightning splitting wood. Dominic's body jerked backward. His hand flew to his chest. Blood bloomed across his black shirt like a terrible flower opening its petals. He stumbled, hit the brick wall behind him, and slid downward, his expensive coat bunching beneath him. "Boss!" Carlo spun around, reaching for his own weapon, but Anthony was already running, feet splashing through puddles, disappearing into the maze of alleys that connected to Madison Street. In the distance, sirens wailed, not for this, but for something else entirely, and Anthony heard them and panicked and ran faster. Dominic's phone fell from his hand. The screen cracked against the concrete, the call disconnecting into silence. Blood pooled beneath him, mixing with rainwater and the smell of wet asphalt. His hand reached toward his waistband, searching for the gun he carried, but his fingers would not obey. Everything was slowing down. Everything was becoming distant, as if he were watching his own death from behind glass. Carlo was shouting orders into his phone. Theo was kneeling beside him, applying pressure to the wound with his jacket, but even Theo knew the truth written in the amount of blood spreading across the ground. At this speed, in this cold, with no immediate medical attention, the most powerful man in Chicago was dying on a sidewalk at 2:33 in the morning. And then footsteps. Elena Harper rounded the corner from Madison Street, a plastic grocery bag clutched in her hand. Bread. Milk. A few apples. Everything she had been able to afford this week with what remained after bills, after rent, after the endless parade of debts that followed her like wolves circling prey. She saw the men in black suits. The blood spreading like a stain that would not be contained. The man sliding down the brick wall. Every logical thought screamed at her to keep walking. This was not her problem. This was the kind of problem that got people killed. She had 2 children who needed her alive. She had shifts to work, debts to pay, a life held together with string and prayer and pure stubborn refusal to break. Elena Harper dropped her grocery bag and ran toward him anyway. The milk carton burst when it hit the sidewalk. Bread rolled into the gutter. The apples scattered like forgotten promises across the wet concrete. She did not look back at them. She knelt beside Dominic in the blood and rain, her eyes wide, her hands moving without thought. "Can you hear me? Can you hear me?" His eyes opened. They were dark as storm clouds, and in them she saw a man who had never needed anyone and was about to discover that he did. "I'm calling 911, Elena said. Her voice shook like a tree in high wind. "We need an ambulance. You're bleeding so much, you're—" "No." The word came out like gravel. "No hospitals. Call Carlo." Carlo was already there, kneeling on Dominic's other side, but he nodded at Elena. Nodded at this stranger with terrified eyes and steady hands. She unwrapped the scarf from around her own neck, the only warm thing she owned, the only thing worth anything, and pressed it hard against the wound in Dominic's chest. Blood soaked through immediately. Then through again. But Elena did not let go. Her fingers pressed harder, her jaw locked, her eyes fierce with the kind of determination that only comes when a stranger becomes, in one moment, your whole responsibility. "I'm calling," she said. She fumbled for her phone with one hand, keeping pressure with the other. Her screen was cracked from being dropped last week, but it still worked. It always worked. Everything she owned was broken but still working. Carlo gave her the number. She dialed. A man answered on the first ring. "Who is this?" His voice was sharp as a knife. "I don't know who you are, but there's a man shot on Madison and 5th and he told me to call this number and he's bleeding so much and I don't know what to do, Anne. Keep pressure on the wound. We're 90 seconds out." The line went dead. Elena looked at the stranger beneath her hands, this man she did not know, this man who probably deserved what was happening to him given the suit and the world he clearly inhabited, and whispered the only thing she could think to whisper. "Stay with me. Whatever you did to deserve this, whatever enemies you have, you don't get to die on my watch. You hear me? You stay with me." Dominic's eyes found hers. And something in them shifted. Some recognition of a woman who had never had power, never had money, never had anything except the choice to keep trying. And she was choosing to keep trying for him. The sound of engines filled the alley. Black SUVs surrounded them, appearing like ghosts in the rain. Men in suits jumped out. They moved with precision, with the kind of practiced urgency that came from doing this before. One of them, the tallest, the one with silver threading his dark hair, knelt down. "I'm Carlo. Thank you for staying with him. We have it from here." But Elena did not move. Did not let go of the wound. Did not relinquish her position until she was sure, absolutely sure, that someone else's hands were equally steady. Only then did she sit back. Only then did she look at her own hands, covered in blood that was not hers, soaking through her sleeves, marking her with something she had never asked for and could not undo. Carlo helped her to her feet. "What's your name?" "Elena." "Elena Harper." "Elena Harper, you just saved his life. You should know that. When people cross Dominic Rossi, they tend to disappear. You chose the opposite. You chose to help when helping could get you killed." He studied her face, really studied it, taking in the exhaustion, the worn clothes, the calluses on her hands. "Where do you live?" "Why?" "Because men like my boss don't forget. And we take care of people who take care of him." The first black SUV pulled away, Dominic inside it now, surrounded by men trained in emergency medicine, heading toward a private facility that did not officially exist. Another SUV pulled up beside Elena. "Get in," Carlo said. It was not an invitation. Elena looked back at the alley. At her groceries scattered and ruined on the pavement. At the blood mixing with rain. At the choice that had made itself in a single second when she could have walked past. She got in the SUV. It raced through Chicago's sleeping streets toward the penthouse that waited like a dark jewel above the city. Elena sat in the back, her hands trembling, her scarf, the one warm thing she owned, gone, given to a stranger who probably had 20 other scarves, probably paid more for a single shirt than she made in a month. She did not know that the man she had saved was the most dangerous criminal in the city. She did not know that his nephew had just triggered a cascade of consequences that would reshape all of their lives. She did not know that across Chicago, in a high-rise apartment overlooking Lake Michigan, a woman named Sophie Langford was already on her phone, already making calls, already beginning to destroy the invisible girl who had the audacity to save the wrong man's life. All Elena Harper knew, as the SUV pulled into the underground garage of a penthouse that belonged to a world she did not understand, was that her life had changed in the time it took for rain to fall and blood to spread and a stranger to look into her eyes and ask for help. And that everything that came next would be because she had chosen to answer. The coffee pot slipped from Elena's trembling hands and shattered against the black and white checkered floor, sending dark liquid spreading across the tiles like spilled blood, like a prophecy written in caffeine and ceramic shards. The diner fell silent. Every customer, every cook, every busboy froze mid-motion, watching as Elena gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles white, her breath coming in gasps that wouldn't fill her lungs properly. Anthony Marchetti had left 5 minutes ago. The $50 bill he'd dropped sat on the counter, mocking her, a fortune that meant nothing compared to what he'd left behind, a threat wrapped in ice, delivered with a smile that contained no warmth, only the certainty of a man who had never been told no and had no intention of starting now. "You okay, Harper?" her manager, Dave, called from the kitchen window, but Elena couldn't answer. Her voice had disappeared somewhere between the moment Anthony leaned close and whispered about Emma and Lucas, about their school, about what would happen to pretty kids when powerful men decided to use them as leverage. 9 years old and 7. That's all they were. That's all she'd been trying to protect. The shift clock read 2:13 in the afternoon. Elena's shift didn't end until 11. 8 more hours of carrying plates and pouring coffee and pretending her hands weren't shaking, pretending her mind wasn't fragmenting into 1,000 different catastrophes, each one worse than the last. She grabbed a towel and bent to clean the broken glass, her movements jerky, uncoordinated. A customer she'd served 100 times placed a hand on her shoulder. "You need to sit down, hun, you look like you're about to faint." Elena couldn't sit. If she sat, she would break. If she broke here, in front of witnesses, it would be over. They would call someone. CPS would hear about it. Social services kept files. One mental health incident could unravel everything she'd built. She finished cleaning at 3:15. At 3:45, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Her stomach clenched before she even read it. The message arrived like a blade. Your building's landlord just received an offer. $500,000. Contingent on the current tenant vacating within 48 hours. You have 2 days before your eviction notice is official. Elena's hand shook so badly she nearly dropped the phone. Another text arrived 30 seconds later. The health department will be inspecting Rosewood Diner tomorrow at 10 a.m. They received an anonymous complaint about improper food storage. Your employer will be fined. You will be blamed. And a third. Your daughter's school received a report about insufficient supervision in your home. A home visit is being scheduled for Friday. Bring anything that suggests negligence. Unpaid bills. Empty refrigerator. Evidence of instability. The messages stopped. Elena stood in the employee bathroom with her hand over her mouth, not making a sound, not letting anything escape that couldn't be taken back. Sophie Langford was methodical. She wasn't using guns or fists or the crude violence that men like Anthony preferred. She was using something far more lethal, the machinery of society itself, the systems that were designed to protect people but could be weaponized by someone with enough money and patience and cruelty. Elena's shifts passed in a blur of panic and numbness. She showed up. She worked. She smiled at customers even though her smile had become a mask worn by a woman who no longer existed underneath it. The health inspection came and went. Dave was furious, ranting about anonymous complaints and vindictive competitors, but his anger meant nothing compared to what came next. Friday morning, 2 caseworkers in business attire sat in Elena's apartment, making notes about the furniture held together with duct tape, the refrigerator containing milk, bread, and half a container of margarine, the heating system that worked only half the time. One of the caseworkers smiled with genuine sympathy while writing down evidence that would eventually be compiled into a file titled Parental Inadequacy, Elena Harper. Emma and Lucas stayed silent the entire time, sitting on the edge of the couch, holding hands, understanding without being told that something dangerous was happening. By Sunday, Elena had received 5 separate official notices. Eviction. Diner closure pending violations. School investigation. Unpaid property taxes she'd never received notice about. A CPS intake report recommending immediate home removal pending full evaluation. She sat on the fire escape at 2 a.m. that night, rain beginning to fall, the November cold cutting through her thin cardigan like a blade wrapped in ice. The metal railing was slick and cold under her palms. For stories down. She'd done the math 1,000 times in her head. With her dead, Emma and Lucas would become available for adoption by a real family. A family with a house. With money. With the kind of mother who didn't make mistakes that destroyed everything she touched. Noah would have Dominic. The people she loved would be better off. She gripped the railing. 1 foot up. The rain hammered down, mixing with something hot on her face that she realized was tears, which meant she could still cry, which meant some part of her still believed in a future worth saving. Her phone buzzed. A text from Noah's hospital nurse, "He keeps asking for you. Wants to show you the drawing he made." Elena stared at the message. Noah's drawing. Probably her with angel wings again, the boy's way of making sense of a woman who had appeared in his life like a guardian fallen from somewhere good. That little boy with the faulty heart and the hope in his eyes. He had no one but her. She climbed down from the railing. Collapsed against the brick wall. Called the one number she swore she wouldn't. The phone rang once. Dominic answered before the second ring. "Yes?" "They're threatening my children," Elena whispered. "I can't. I don't know what to do anymore." Silence. "Then, where are you?" "Home. But they said tomorrow they're filing." "Lock your doors. Don't open them for anyone but Carlo. I'm handling this." The line died. At that same hour, across the city, Dominic stood in his office with Carlo and Theo flanking him like shadows. His suit was impeccable, his expression carved from stone, but his eyes burnt with something his men had rarely seen. Not anger. Not quite. Something colder. Anthony threatened her children, he said quietly. How old? Carlo asked. 9 and 7. Theo's jaw tightened. Orders? Find Anthony. Find Sophie. I want Anthony alive and brought to me. Sophie. Dominic's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I want her public destruction to be so complete she'll wish I'd killed her. At 3:48 a.m., 12 men in black tactical gear moved through Chicago's sleeping streets like ghosts, like a knife cutting through darkness. They knew their movements. They had trained for this. They had been waiting for the moment when loyalty meant something violent. The first black SUV pulled up to Anthony's penthouse in the financial district. The door to his luxury apartment exploded inward at 3:52 a.m. Anthony was awake, drunk, confident, celebrating what he believed was his inevitable victory. His hand reached for the gun on the nightstand. Carlo's boot connected with his wrist before his fingers closed around it. Bones cracked like branchwood snapping. Anthony screamed, a sound without dignity, without the veneer of power. He collapsed to his knees as Theo pressed a weapon to his spine. You can't do this, Anthony gasped. I'm blood. I'm family. You threaten children, Carlo said, his voice quiet, which was somehow more terrifying than if he had shouted. You stopped being family the moment you forgot what that word means. They dragged him out screaming into the night. At the same moment, across the city at Sophie Langford's mansion on the Gold Coast, Dominic rang the doorbell at 4:31 a.m. His cashmere coat hung perfect and immaculate. His hands were empty. Sophie answered in a silk robe, champagne glass still in hand, celebrating the power she believed was now hers. Dominic. Come to negotiate? No, he said, stepping inside without invitation. Come to watch you fall. By 6:15 a.m., every media outlet in Chicago had received an anonymous package. Recordings of Sophie bribing health department officials. Video of her threatening school administrators. Financial records showing embezzlement from her own charity foundations. Photographs of her coordinating Anthony's assassination attempt. The FBI arrived at 7:03 a.m. Sophie was arrested on her front lawn in her silk robe while news helicopters circled overhead, capturing everything, broadcasting her humiliation live to a city that would spend weeks discussing her downfall. The woman who had weaponized society was destroyed by the very systems she had tried to corrupt. You can't do this, she screamed as they cuffed her. I have connections. I have lawyers. I have? Nothing, Dominic said from across her perfectly manicured lawn. You have nothing now. And that's more mercy than you showed Elena Harper's children. 40 years. That's what the federal judge sentenced her to, reading the number with the finality of a death knell. No parole. No possibility of early release. Federal prison for 40 years. Sophie wept in her orange jumpsuit in a holding cell, finally understanding that money and society and cruelty could be erased, could be made to mean nothing. Anthony's fate was quieter. Darker. He disappeared into the night, taken to a warehouse basement where Dominic waited for him, where the real consequences began, not death, which would have been a mercy, but erasure. A cargo ship to Alaska. A new name. A life of minimum wage labor and absolute anonymity. The kind of poverty that breaks men born to power. If he ever returned to Chicago, Dominic had told him simply, if he ever spoke of what happened, if he ever even thought about Elena or her children, then he would learn what happened to people who pushed redemption too far. Anthony was never seen in Chicago again. Elena waited in her apartment while the city woke up to the news. The waiting room at Northwestern Memorial Hospital smelled like antiseptic and exhaustion. Elena sat in a chair that cost more than her entire apartment, her hands folded so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Across from her, Dominic Rossi stood at the window with his shoulders against the glass, a man carved from marble and barely breathing. 6 hours and 43 minutes. That's how long Noah had been in surgery. That's how long they had both been waiting to learn if a 6-year-old boy would live. The operating room doors swung open. Dr. Chen emerged, still wearing his surgical mask around his neck, and Elena's heart seized like a fist closing around stone. The valve replacement was successful, Dr. Chen said, his voice steady and sure. He'll need monitoring, medication management, but he's going to live a full life. A normal life. You can see him in about 20 minutes. Elena didn't remember standing. She didn't remember moving across the room. But suddenly Dominic's arms were around her, holding her as she broke into tears, not the silent, controlled tears she had perfected over years of hiding pain, but the kind that came from somewhere deeper than survival, from the place where hope had been locked away so long she'd forgotten the combination. He's going to live, she whispered into Dominic's chest. Noah's going to live. Dominic didn't speak. His hand moved to the back of her head, cradling her with a gentleness that contradicted everything his reputation claimed about him. Carlo and Theo had already disappeared. They knew what was coming next, knew that their boss needed privacy for something more fragile than violence. 20 minutes later, they stood in Noah's recovery room. The boy lay small in the hospital bed, tubes running from his arms, machines beeping out the rhythm of his healing heart. His eyes were still closed, his breathing shallow but steady, the rise and fall of his small chest a rhythm like a prayer answered. Noah's eyelids fluttered. His eyes opened slowly, unfocused and heavy with anesthesia. Dad. His voice came out thin as paper, confused, reaching for something his mind couldn't quite grasp. Dominic moved to the bedside. His hand that had signed death sentences, that had held guns, that had built an empire on fear, reached out and took Noah's small fingers with infinite care. I'm here, Noah. You look for me. The boy's words came in fragments, his drugged mind assembling pieces. Miss Elena said you looked a long time. I did. For a very long time. I'm sorry I got lost. Tears spilled from Noah's eyes, the kind of heartbreaking apology only a child could make, as if his own suffering had somehow been a failure on his part. Dominic sat on the edge of the hospital bed. The most powerful man in Chicago, the man who had built his empire on the bones of his enemies, bent close to his son's face and whispered words Elena couldn't hear. His shoulders moved with breathing that suggested he was trying not to break. Elena stepped backward, ready to give him this moment alone. Ready to slip away like she had slipped away so many times before, the invisible woman in the background, the helper who did not ask for gratitude. Elena. Stay. Dominic's voice stopped her. She turned. His eyes found hers across the small hospital room, and in them was something she had never seen before, not gratitude, not obligation, but a kind of desperate need. This is your moment with him, Elena said quietly. You're his father. You're part of this family. You protected him when I couldn't. You loved him. You kept him safe. You gave me back my son. Dominic's voice cracked like ice breaking in spring. Don't leave. Please don't leave. Elena moved to the bedside. She stood beside Dominic, and his free hand found hers and held it like it might disappear. 3 months unfolded like a story being rewritten. Dominic used his resources for something that wasn't destruction. He called in favors that had nothing to do with violence. He made phone calls that opened doors instead of closing them forever. Elena's Bakery Cafe opened on a corner in Bucktown, its windows facing north toward the lake. The space had been chosen by Dominic but designed by Elena, cream-colored walls, wooden tables marked with water rings from coffee cups, the smell of rising bread at 5 in the morning like a benediction. He never asked for payment. Never mentioned money. Simply ensured that the build-out was complete, the permits were processed, the suppliers were reliable, and the neighborhood association had no objections. I can't accept this, Elena had said when she first saw the space. You already have, Dominic replied. Now make it into something beautiful. She did. The apartment came next, 3 bedrooms in a building where the radiators worked and the landlord returned deposits and the hallway didn't smell like despair. A place where Emma and Lucas could have their own rooms. Where Elena could breathe without counting the cost of every breath. Noah split his time between Dominic's penthouse and Elena's apartment. He called her Miss Elena still, clinging to the formality because love felt safer when it had boundaries. But his eyes lit up when he saw her car pull into the driveway. His small hand reached for hers first when they walked into the bakery. Emma and Lucas, suspicious at first, children learn not to trust kindness when kindness has always come with a price, slowly understood that Dominic wasn't a threat to their mother. That his presence meant safety instead of danger. They adored Noah with the fierce protectiveness of siblings who understood what it meant to almost lose something precious. Dominic attended Noah's follow-up appointments with a cardiologist who charged $600 per visit and never sent a bill. He showed up to school events in his tailored suits while other parents in their casual clothes moved subtly away from him, sensing something about him that didn't belong in a gymnasium full of second graders. He sat on the edge of Noah's bed at night and read chapter books about dragons and quests, his deep voice filling the darkness with adventure. Carlo and Theo watched their boss transform, and in that transformation, they understood something about power they had never considered before. That the hardest thing a man could do wasn't to give orders that resulted in death. The hardest thing was to sit beside a child's bed and read words aloud without cracking, to love something so completely that the thought of loss could bring a man to his knees. The city moved on from Sophie's arrest. The news cycle found new scandals. By autumn, her imprisonment was no longer front-page material, it had become a detail in articles about white-collar crime, a cautionary tale lawyers referenced at dinner parties. 1 year later, the sunset caught Chicago in shades of rose and amber, and Elena stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of a penthouse that belonged to her, the penthouse Dominic had purchased in her name alone. The bakery had expanded. 3 locations now, each one staffed by women he had quietly rescued from situations similar to Elena's, each one given the same gift, a chance to rebuild. She wore success differently than she wore survival. It hung on her like confidence instead of armor, like she had finally stopped waiting for catastrophe to swallow her whole. The door opened behind her. Footsteps crossed the marble floor with a familiar rhythm. Emma said you were up here, Dominic said quietly. Dinner's ready downstairs. Noah made you a card. He made me cry with the last one, Elena said without turning from the window. This one has glitter. Prepare accordingly. Elena smiled. Dominic crossed the space between them and stood beside her at the window. The city spread out below them, 1,000 lights in the darkness, 1,000,000 stories of people trying to survive, trying to build something that would last. You know what today is? Dominic asked. Elena nodded. 1 year ago I found a stranger bleeding on a sidewalk. 1 year ago you saved my life. You paid me back 1,000 times over. No. Dominic turned to face her fully. His eyes held something she had never seen before, vulnerability so profound it seemed to cost him everything to allow it. I need to tell you something. Something I've carried every single day this year. Elena turned from the window. When my son was taken 7 years ago, when his nursery stayed empty and I couldn't say his name out loud without breaking, I stopped believing in redemption. I convinced myself that good was a fairy tale told to children, that the only truth in the world was power and fear and the absolute certainty that anyone you loved could be ripped away. His voice cracked like something breaking inside him. Then you knelt in the November rain with $17 in your pocket and chose to save a stranger's life. A stranger who meant nothing to you. You protected Noah when you had no obligation to him, no guarantee of safety, no promise of reward. Elena's breath caught. You gave me something I thought had died with my son, a reason to believe that good still exists. That redemption is real. That a man like me could still become something other than the sum of the violence he's committed. Dominic reached for her hand. His fingers traced the calluses on her palm, the evidence of every double shift, every hour of labor, every sacrifice. You saved my life, Elena. Not just on that sidewalk. Every day since. You saved me from the darkness. Elena stepped closer. You saved me and my children. You gave us a life. You gave us a future. You gave me a reason to deserve that future. Dominic's free hand moved to her face. His thumb traced her cheekbone with infinite gentleness. I'm not asking for anything. I just needed you to know, family is not always bound by blood, but by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives. Elena finished the sentence for him. When everything is falling apart and the world tells you to run, you stay anyway. They kissed as the sun descended below the Chicago skyline, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold. Behind them, through the penthouse windows, Emma, Lucas, and Noah pressed their small faces against the glass, watching, waiting. Carlo and Theo stood behind the children, smiling at something they had never thought they would witness, their boss, the man who had built empires on fear, finally understanding that the greatest power was the power to love without condition, to protect without expectation, to choose compassion when the world said to choose vengeance instead. If this story moved your heart, if it reminded you that redemption is real and second chances matter, hit that like button right now. Leave a comment and tell me what you would have done in Elena's position that night on the sidewalk. Would you have stopped to save a stranger at 3 in the morning? Would you have trusted Dominic's help when everyone told you to run? Subscribe because tomorrow's story will take you somewhere you've never been, and I promise you won't want to miss it. Thank you for being here with us until the very end. Thank you for believing in the power of compassion, for understanding that the most powerful thing any of us can do is choose to stay, to love, to build something beautiful from the broken pieces we've been given. And remember this as you go forward with your own life. Whatever storms you're facing, no matter how hard life gets, no matter how dark the night becomes, the most redemptive force in the universe is a single person who decides that another person's life matters more than their own fear. That's love. That's family. And that's everything.